Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire.
Oh, you're trying to bring me down and run me out of town. You're taking what you want, but you can't take my rhythm now. I'm walking to my own beat, just gonna be me. I'm not replicating nobody.
Hey, youth workers, this is Doug Edwards, and I've got my buddy Zane Balmer with me. Zane and I have actually only had one sit down before. We've waved at each other from a distance at times. He was at my the church that I worked at for many years, and that's where he is as youth worker now at Trinity Evangelical Free Church. But he drove a long way, he and his wife, to get here. Now, Zane, you seem like a very organized guy. Are you an organized guy?
You know, it depends on the day.
That's a good answer, because youth pastors, there are some that are super organized. I know a few. Most of us are a little ADD. If you are both, then that makes you probably the perfect guy for student ministry. Not many of us are both. I'm just going to say, if you feel like you're unorganized some days, that you're more of a creator. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that is a fair point.
There you go. That's a good thing, because students need that creative person and also that organized person. But here's what I'm going to ask you to right off the bat, because I'm not going to start with your bio except to tell everybody he is a third-generation pastor. Is that the way you would say it? Grandfather, dad, you?
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, I didn't really want to be, and I'm not sure if we're going to get into this at a later point or not, but my dad never once pushed me toward ministry. And, you know, my grandpa was a pastor in the Evangelical Free Church and a district superintendent as well. But I actually never got to meet him. He passed before I was born, about a year before I was born.
Wow.
But then my dad was and still is a pastor. And it wasn't until after I was in college where I went back and told my dad, hey, I feel the Lord leading me to ministry, that he's like, yep, I thought for a long time that you'd be good at it, but I never wanted to push you toward it. And so that I really appreciated that. And now it's cool, you know, being able to say, yeah, I'm a third generation pastor in my family.
No, absolutely. And it's great that your dad didn't. We didn't push our kids that way either. They volunteer in their churches. They love the church, which is also unusual. I can't say unusual. It's growing up as a pastor's kid is a tough life. It's a different life than most people have. But before we get into any more of that, I'm going to get you right off the bat with this. We did not talk about you and your wife's love story. The reason I like love stories is because the Bible is full of love stories. God seems to like them too. And there's nothing more important than you and your wife's relationship when you're in ministry.
I was homeschooled from 5th grade through 9th grade, and decided to go to the high school my sophomore year. And so my sophomore year, I was sitting in my homeroom class, and about three seats up in front of me, I was like, man, who is this cheerleader? She is so cute. And so I texted one of my friends, and I was like, hey, tell me about this girl. And she was like, oh, that's Mackenzie, but she's dating somebody. And I was like, oh, that's too bad. Okay. But I was a sophomore at the time, and, you know, she was a senior, I believe. And come the end of that year, she wasn't dating anybody. And I was like, man, she's about to be gone. I've just got to shoot my shot. I got to try, or else I won't ever have a chance.
That's right.
And so I did, you know, something that no girl could say no to. And I asked her out at her graduation party. In the letter or the card that I gave her, I basically, you know, wrote, would you consider going out with me? And here's the part that they wouldn't say no to: a $15 Taco Bell gift card. I mean, come on, you know. I look back on that and I'm like, I couldn't have done it any better. No, but you know, we laugh about that now. But she actually she turned me down, and you know, there were a lot of reasons that played into that. But what's cool about our story is that from that point, 5 years passed with basically no contact. And to backtrack a little bit, the reason I was so interested in her is because even from a distance, I just saw how how much of a witness she had for her faith and how intentional she was and how bold she was about her faith, considering the circle that she was in. And, I was just all about that. So anyway, 5 years passed, and we had both gone different directions, been in serious relationships, and we can only attribute it to the Lord that He redirected our path, and we crossed paths once again. And from there, we had many people just confirming our relationship. And I can't go into detail now; it'd take too much time. But there were a ton of really cool, just small moments where it was just undeniably the Lord working. And we ended up dating pretty quickly and got engaged after 2 months, and then married after another 9 months. And it was just so clear that the Lord was working in that. So that is a little bit of our story. And then, we got married 2 months after COVID hit. So our wedding went from about 150 to 200 guests down to 17 people. That was a bit of a shock, but we look back and we wouldn't have changed a thing. It was just such a wonderful day, and we loved being able to have that time with our families.
That's awesome, and a great love story. I'm sure there's more detail that we could get into there, but I think that's pretty cool all the way around, and something that's going to interest people, especially looking at their lives and whether they're single or whether they're married already with kids or in ministry. But did she see ministry coming?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a little bit of background required for that question with my wife, and she went to a different church in high school than I did. She was involved in the youth ministry there, but it wasn't until after I went off to college that she came back from college and actually started attending the church where I grew up, where my dad was the lead pastor. And after attending there for a while, she got involved in youth ministry and actually started discipling my sister, no relation to me in that at all. And so she has always felt called toward youth ministry. Right before we started spending time together and then dating, I had just accepted a part-time youth director position in Winnetka, Illinois. So I was already heading into youth ministry before we kind of got together. And from there, we're both like, hey, we're both passionate about youth ministry. But she's also, had the understanding that, when kids come, she may not be able to continue serving in youth ministry, but still has a passion for it and a desire to love on these girls.
Well, and listen, that is such a big deal for anyone that's listening. If your spouse, and I've interviewed some to where it took the spouse a while to catch up to that, student ministry is just a calling for both of us. But that is really, really awesome, really amazing. And you never stop being in student ministry. So catch us up to date with where you are, how you got there. Just catch us up with you and Mackenzie and what's happening now.
Yeah, so Ryan Schmitz is the lead pastor at Trinity. And before that, he was up on Washington Island. But before Washington Island, he was actually the youth pastor in Freeport, Illinois, under my dad. And that started because my dad was a youth pastor in Sarasota, Florida for a few years. And Pastor Ryan came to the Lord through that youth ministry, and my dad discipled him. And so Ryan has been a part of my life since I was really young. So when he was down in Florida and they were able to hire a youth position, he's like, Zane, he's like, I'd love to, hire you for this position. And so I was, in part-time ministry in Winnetka, Illinois, and then transitioned down here to Florida in February 2021. He had me start on Valentine's Day because that's just Ryan, and he thought it'd be funny.
So you're here, you're doing the student ministry, and I think that's a great, interesting connection. I didn't know that your dad was in student ministry at one point himself. And I do remember Ryan and I, before you ever came, talking about a connection with your dad. Tell me where you are, though. Now, this is, how many years have you been doing student ministry here? Tell me what's been happening, because here you went from a business degree to a ministry degree, feeling called, you and Mackenzie both, her before you, about being called to student ministry. Well, now you're in it full time. What is that like? What's been happening?
Yeah, so we've been here just shy of 2.5 years, and it was a little bit of a transition and getting used to because um, stepping into it, um, there wasn't a lot established. When you were at Trinity, you had a lot going on, you had it very established, but there were some years that went by from there where they just didn't really have a lot of investment into the youth. And so when I stepped in, there were no sacred cows that I had to worry about. They really knew nothing. I mean, the students that were there had not experienced a youth pastor who just really wanted to give them everything they had. I mean, they had a little bit of youth ministry going on, but no one to dedicate full time. Like, I want to pour into you guys. So everything that I was introducing was new and it was exciting. And so it was a fun season for that first 6 months of just getting established and building those relationships. And then we just continued to work on just growing that and adding more leaders. And what I've been really pouring a lot of time into, and where my heart is student leaders. So developing we call it a student ministry team, but it's essentially a group of student leaders who want to go deeper in their faith, but they also want to be more involved at youth group. And I tell them that being in this group means that they're going to have a higher sense of accountability with me. They're going to have a closer relationship to me. And it's been a really cool opportunity for me to pour into their lives on a deeper level than what 2 hours on a Wednesday night would allow. So that's been one of the exciting things. And this summer we're taking our first mission trip together with the high school students. So there's been some cool things going on, and plenty of ups and downs, of course, but that's kind of where we're at this moment.
So tell me where you're going on your mission trip.
So we are going to Miami, and for Florida students, it's like, not that different, but I mean, Miami is pretty different, all things considered. So
Let me put people in perspective here. My first mission trip to the Dominican Republic, and that year we had gone to Arizona, Papago Indian Reservation, turned right around and went to the Dominican, but we stopped in Miami to do training. But right before we flew down for 2 weeks into the Dominican Republic. Miami is a foreign nation.
it really is.
It is not like the rest of Florida at all. And so for you guys to go down there and to do a mission in Miami, it's an international mission. That's what you guys are going on. So if anybody
really
thinks,
is.
oh, it's just another place in Florida, it is not at all.
Yeah, we're excited about it, and we've been, to prove your point, we've been meeting once a month with the students, and a big part of that meeting is doing Spanish classes together.
Yes.
So yeah, it really is a different country, it feels like.
And how did you end up choosing that particular mission trip?
Part of it is, as we're getting established and trying to build a good structure within the youth ministry, going straight to an international mission trip, I think would have been a little bit harder to convince parents, like, hey, we should do this, but even students, giving them a little bit of a taste of, what an international mission trip could feel like and what it would be. Miami was kind of a good jumping block into that. And so the hope would be next year or the year after that, we do an international mission trip. But I also could see that Miami would be really fruitful, and maybe we just go back to Miami. So that's why we chose Miami, and it's close. It's a little bit more affordable for everybody raising funds this year.
God shows up when you go and you go to meet needs. He just shows up. Tell me what life was like growing up in middle school, high school for you, though. What was your best and worst middle school, high school moment in life?
Yeah, so I'll start with my worst moment. And I think that, a lot of pastors' kids can relate to this if you're listening out there. And, there's different pressures and challenges that can come with being a pastor's kid. But one of those is when issues arise in the church, you see dad a lot less, and right before I was going into high school, we had a really tragic situation of essentially moral failure with one of the volunteers in the youth ministry, and it caused havoc on our church. And it was a really hard season for me. The youth ministry before the situation occurred was going 100 strong for high school students. And it wrecked the youth ministry. And it also essentially took my dad away for a year, as he's in elder meetings weekly and constantly stressing about this. And if he's home, he's not mentally present. So that was a really hard season, not only for that year, but also because of the effects that it had long term. So there was fruit that came from that, where the students who really wanted to go, no, we're serious about our faith regardless, continue to stay and grow. But the youth group was never the same after that. So that was a really hard season. But I would say the best experience that I had middle school and high school would be the mission trips that we would go on. Because I'd go into these mission trips. I remember my first mission trip expecting it to be, we're going to go and serve these people and it's going to be so wonderful. But in reality, yeah, we did serve. But really what it did is it just shocked me to the reality of other cultures and gave me a new perspective on life and even ministry that I hadn't had before. And so just seeing how Lord really challenged my heart in that, and it was impactful in my faith, as well as building relationships with my peers and uniting the group that was a hurting group. Uniting the group to grow together was just such a fruitful time. So those mission trips will always have a special place in my heart, as I remember how impactful they were and informative in my faith as well.
Well, and the great thing is you're going to carry all those things over into student ministry that you're in.
Yeah.
The great thing is that you had those experiences. Now, when you take students into them, you're looking for what can happen to them and with them. Tell us the worst ministry moment you have had, and then we'll go to the best.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's really requires you to dig deep and think about what has been the hardest moment. And actually for me, some of my hardest moments have turned into some of the best moments too. And so before I was here in Florida, I was in Winnetka for a year and a half doing student ministry, and we had a trip where the students were so excited about it, but we had to cancel it because of COVID. But I was like, we still should do something. I want to have something for these students to do. And so we threw together with another youth group a local mission trip, essentially. And it was a very small youth group as it was, but I had about 8 students signed up. And I'm like, you know what? That's still cool. We'll take 8 students. And the week before, 6 students dropped out, or 5 students dropped out. And I just felt crushed,
Oh, wow.
because as much as we try not to focus on numbers too, you can't not when you have 3 students going on a trip where you were supposed to have 8 students going. And that just crushed me the week before, and I was feeling so down. And my wife really challenged me to go, you know what, Zane, maybe these are exactly the students that God put here for a reason, and they're the ones that we need to pour into. And so we went anyway, and it was so cool to see how God used that, because we had one of the hardest weeks I've ever had on a mission trip, or on a trip in general. I mean, breakdowns and terrible attitudes, but through the middle of the week, what I saw is those walls coming down, and students that I had not been able to get through to all of a sudden were in tears, just thinking about their life, and allowed room for relationship to be built there. And we left going, you know what? Yeah, it's sad that we didn't take more students, but these were the students that needed to be there. And so that turned into a good moment, but it was hard. And so it was a bad experience, but it turned into a really good experience.
Tell me about some of the breakdowns. Was it vehicles?
Oh, sorry. I mean, mentally and emotionally breaking down. And it was because these students were coming from a a culture and environment where it's North Shore Chicago, so it's very elite, very wealthy, and academics is incredibly valued and pushed. And the pressures that these students face are unreal. I mean, the depression and anxiety and suicide rates in that area are high from what I recall. And um, so they, being out of their comfort zone, it was a week to say the least. But God really allowed room for relationships to be built and for me to be able to speak life into some of these students.
That is amazing, and I appreciate you giving us the background of the type of students you're dealing with. And every place we're dealing with different types of pressure. Students are under pressure. Their families are under pressure, and they're all different kinds of pressures in this world. So thank you for sharing that. And tell me about your best moment in student ministry to this day.
I actually have one more of the worst experiences, if that's all right if I share that.
Sure, go ahead.
But I think that one of the hardest things that I've seen is just pouring into students, or specifically, a student, and you're discipling them and loving on them and helping them to see God's love for them and the calling that God has placed on their life, and see them get it. But then the pull of the world is stronger, and seeing them walk away from the faith and distance themselves from the Lord. That's, those are hard moments. And I'll come back to that at a later point as well. But um, some of the best experiences I've seen come from the student leadership team, and just seeing how there's students who are serious about their faith and they want to go deeper, and it allows room for that accountability that I was referencing earlier. So that's been really exciting to see that, and see some of the fruit of the labor, because as you know very well, a lot of times we don't see that for a long time, or if at all. But with the student leadership team, it's been a little bit more of an accelerated, growth rate, just as they're more invested, they're plugged in, and they have a desire to grow. So that's been really exciting to see.
Yeah, they've got ownership, and that is a great thing. You've got to have ownership. All of us want ownership. Why wouldn't students want it? What's something in your life that's gone on that almost nobody knows about?
I think what comes to my mind, people who were around me in high school know about this, and my family knows, but my senior year of high school, I really felt the Lord laying on my heart missions. And so I spent the summer in between my senior year of high school and freshman year of college in Brazil, with about 3 other college students that I didn't know. And I was in Rio de Janeiro just doing missions for the summer. And so that was a really cool experience that was incredibly formational in my walk with the Lord, and even in my calling into ministry. But a lot of people don't know that when they first meet me, but it was a wonderful experience in my life. Going into it, I kind of had this expectation that missions would be like the missionary books you read, where they have these crazy experiences. And I was a little bit thrown off at first, because what we did was we lived with a missionary for the summer. And my expectations were changed pretty quickly, because I realized that missions is not necessarily like that every day. And a lot of missions is building relationships and getting rapport in the community, and even raising up leaders in that local area, instead of coming in and being the guy. It's coming in and raising up locals who know the people, who know the context. And so missions was, the understanding of it was changed in my mind for sure. But one of my favorite experiences that we had was we would spend time with college age students that were from Brazil, and we would go to churches that were held in their homes, and we would be worshiping and singing a song in Portuguese that we sing in English. So as we're singing it in English, they're singing it in Portuguese, and it was just a really beautiful moment to see the church united globally through language barriers. Because I didn't speak fluent Portuguese by any means. but yet we could be brothers and sisters in Christ through that moment. And that was a really, really wonderful time. On top of that, there was quite a bit of culture shock when we went into the favelas because we were told, the favelas, it's the drug lords that reign there. It's not the police. So the minute you walk into the favelas, we were told, don't wear blue, and I don't remember the other color. But if you're wearing those colors and you're seen walking in, you have a really good chance of being shot. And that's how strong the drug lords are in that area. So it's quite a bit of culture shock to go in there knowing that, we don't really have safety. We don't really have protection. But it was so cool to see the ministry that was still happening there despite that.
When you first came in, kind of a shock. Was it about midway point when you started seeing the difference in what you thought it was going to be and what it was happening?
It was pretty quickly into the trip where I was like, are we going to do anything crazy? I had that kind of that expectation.
Well, that was crazy.
Yeah, but that came later on. Yeah, that came later on, and it was, it kind of drove me crazy the first week because I'm like, when are we going to go do something? But his big thing was, come and see, where Jesus says that to the disciples, come and see. And that was kind of our theme for the summer of come and see what's ministry is happening in Rio, but also inviting others to do the same. So it was really more of a learning summer for me than it was, you're going to be incredibly hands-on, doing missions. We had some of that, but it was more of a learn the culture, learn the context, see what's going on rather than try to jump in and mess it up.
To me, it sounds like a lot what the disciples went through with Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think there were times when they were like, come on, let's do it, let's do more. And he'd say, nope, come over here, we're going to rest for a while. What? We don't want to rest? What? We're here for some excitement and we want to get something
right.
going.
Yeah.
And part of that's an American thing and part of it's just a youth thing, a young thing. Tell us some things that you want to tell youth pastors.
John 3:30, he must become greater, I must become less. That's really been a life verse for me. But what I really want to talk about with, kind of share with other youth pastors, as we all know so well, is, there are so many moments in ministry where we've poured out everything we have. And sometimes we get to see the fruit of that ministry, and sometimes we don't, or we see it way later, as I've heard from many youth pastors. But, kind of as I mentioned before, with a specific student that I've been pouring into for a long time, seeing kind of take a step back from their faith, it's so easy to become so discouraged and blame that on ourselves as well. Like, man, where did I go wrong? I wasn't good enough. I didn't do this right. But I think that in those moments, it's really easy to want to play God. Whereas what I remind myself of and where other people remind me is that, we are called to be faithful. And though we may want to just shake them on the shoulders and go, why aren't you getting this? Why aren't you seeing how important it is and how much of a better life following Jesus is? I think that we need to remember our place in ministry. And so I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians 3:6, where Paul says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. I think remembering our place in ministry is that, we're not God, and we plant the seed, and we be as faithful as we can possibly be in discipling them and teaching them in the ways of the Lord. But we don't work as the Holy Spirit works in their heart. And I think we give ourselves too much credit if we think that way, though it's tempting at times. And so that's kind of the thing that I would want to share as an encouragement within the discouragement.
That's a huge word to people that are listening. And the one thing they taught us in Youth for Christ was they said, you won't know really what you've done till year 5. And I'm going, yeah. I don't even know if I'll last to year 5. And so sure enough, at year 5, I had a kid call me. His name was Billy. And he said, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I said, yeah, I remember you. I remember he was a mess and hard to deal with. And he said, I just want you to know, I remembered the things that you said to us and they landed, but it wasn't till recently I asked Jesus into my heart and I wanted to call you and let you know what happened.
That's so cool.
And sure enough, it was 5 years in. And so thank you for sharing what you're sharing, because I think you're a way ahead of the calendar, a way ahead of certain aspects of maturity, because you are a third generation family pastor. And you got a wife that was praying about student ministry and believing that that's where she needed to go before y'all got together. I think there's just a lot of huge things that are going on in you. And the words that you just shared with everybody are landing on so many. Zane, God bless you. God bless Mackenzie. God bless Trinity and Ryan for bringing you in. You know what? Your heart's going to be even softer and know how to deal with other pastors' children too and love them, which is probably some of the hardest kids to help and love. You're going to empathize and do some things that a lot of guys would not know how to do. So God bless you and thank you for your time tonight. Is there anything else you want to say, though, before we close this out?
Just want to say thank you for your encouragement and for your ministry as well to youth workers and volunteers. And thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this time.
Absolutely, Zane. Me too, buddy. All right, listen, we'll talk to you soon. You have a good night.
All right. Thanks, Doug.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.